Yes, Geoffrey Chaucer, the first father figure, the first great figure, father of English poetry and English literature was no other than but Geoffrey Chaucer, 1340 to 1400. Although we can say that he was uh, basically Chaucer is so far removed from us, and his manner and language, especially in the original Middle English, we can easily underestimate this astonishing man. He was not only a great poet, he was not only a great poet, but a fine storyteller, but also the first of the humorists. And this man, whether moving as a diplomat from one royal court to another royal court, and his greatest work belongs not to romance but to poetic and the humorous realism. With Chaucer, the writer is no longer anonymous but emerges in all its variety, in all its subtlety of an impressive individual. From the common people of early England and Scotland came ballads, songs not written down but recited and sung in innumerable alehouses and at thousands of firesides, जो आग लगा करके लोग बैठ जाते हैं गांव में और म्यूजिक गाते हैं, गाना गाते हैं, फोक गाते हैं. So this folk poetry flourished in the 14th and the 15th centuries, but it was not until the middle of the 18th century that it was carefully collected and published. The popular drama reached a tremendous height in the Elizabethan age, लेकिन उसका origin कहाँ था? In the Middle Ages. During the frequent holiday times, celebrating the religious festivals, the trade guilds entertained the crowd with the miracle plays, with the rough dramatizations of biblical stories which are performed on the large platforms, in the marketplaces, in the inn yards, in the churches. As a rule, the wicked characters in these plays, including the devil himself, were played as comic characters, thereby creating a tradition of popular comedy, and that Elizabethan dramatists followed. It was all very rough, very ready, but in these humble performances, there was already stirring the glorious theatre of Shakespeare. कि वो आने वाला है. And towards the end of the Middle Ages in England, during the dark, troubled times of the 15th century, the miracle plays gave place to the morality plays. And these plays, although presented in the same way as the miracle plays, tended to be elaborate, sophisticated dramatic allegories in which characters representing various virtues and vices confronted each other. The most famous of the morality play, and one is still often performed in many countries, is or was Everyman. Although this play was not English in origin, a thoroughly English adaptation of it soon became very popular. Even during the present century, this play has been performed in the English theatre fairly often. English literature owes a great deal to the Middle Ages. In this period, a great many literary forms had their origin. The Gothic, the Middle Ages, best represented now by their glorious cathedrals, have always been haunted the imagination of more than poetic writers, English writers, with the brilliant and colored visions of the knights, the squires, the minstrels, the pages, the pilgrims, the crusaders, the monks, the scholars, and the fine ladies. You all can see these details in the Chaucer's poetry. But the real secret of this appeal of this period at its best does not lie in the romantic picturesqueness, enchanting though it may be. It comes from the fact that during these years, Western man, that restless, inventive, aggressive, troubled creatures, achieved an elaborate, organized way of life completely contained within a common religion. Now we will discuss one of the most important uh, this lecture about Chaucer's uniqueness. Why Chaucer is the father of English poetry, and why is Chaucer unique in himself? Just listen to this lecture carefully. And after listening to this lecture, students, feel and realize कि आपको कितना ज्यादा आता था या कितना नहीं आता था, और आप कितना ज्यादा आपका दिमाग नरिश हो गया है इस लेक्चर को सुनने के बाद. Chaucer was the first great English poet, and he remains till this day one of the greatest. We shall not be far from truth if we say that among the English poets who have drawn inspiration from human life and attempted to reproduce reality in their poems, taking reality as it is, not as the poet wants to be, Chaucer is the greatest. It is therefore as a great poet of life that Chaucer has got the eminent position among the poets of England. And his works have been popular in all the civilized countries of the world and at all times. His antique language and the remoteness of his subject matter, notwithstanding to the common readers, he has always been a harbinger of joy and delight in the ordinary act of living and in all types of human activities. Chaucer has given them a poetry in which joy in life is the central point, a realization that the pageant life, with all its faults, with all its aberrations, is worth enjoying. And in this way, he has given a new meaning, significance, and so many things to the material aspects of life. जॉन ड्राइडन का नाम आप जानते होंगे. जॉन ड्राइडन, who was once a great poet, who was at once a great poet and a great critic, when delighted by Chaucer's poetry, could only exclaim, क्या कहा? Here is God's plenty. ये कई बार एग्जाम में आ चुका है. Who has given this quote? किसने किसके लिए कहा है? Here is God's plenty! Exclamation mark. And this exclamation of appreciation epitomizes the great quality of Chaucer's poetry. He is the poet of earth, supremely content to walk, desiring no wings. Chaucer has an almost unending interest in life, and with serene detachment, he accepts things as they are, and exercising his wonderful capacity for enjoyment, takes delight in everything and invites his readers to share the enjoyment with him. Yes. So now we will discuss here Chaucer's poetical works, which are of great importance for your exam. So first of all, there has been a great controversy about the exact number of poems that Chaucer has composed. Nobody knows कि कितने exact उसने लिखे हैं. About his important works, the Chaucerian scholars are more or less agreed that Chaucer composed them at particular periods of time in their life. But about his less important works, there has been a lot of debates, and in the absence of dependable documents and records, critical opinions have never agreed about crediting Chaucer with their authorship. So the first which I want to teach you here is the Romance of the Rose, जिसको कि हम कहते हैं Romance of the Rose भी कहते हैं, which is supposed to be the earliest work of Chaucer, and it is a fragmentary translation. Romance of the Rose is a fragmentary translation of the French romantic poem Le Roman de la Rose. Original क्या था? Le Roman de la Rose by two authors, and these two authors are गुलियाम डी लॉरिस एंड जीन डी म्योंग। ये सब नेट एसेंट्रिक है, आपने एग्जाम में पेपर से देख लीजिएगा। ये जितनी भी चीजें मैं अब आपको बताने जा रहा हूं सब आपको पेपर्स में छपी मिलेंगी पिछले 10 साल में। कि व्हाट इज द ओरिजिनल ले रोमन डी ला रोज, हु आर द राइटर्स ऑफ दिस ओरिजिनल, गुलियाम डी लॉरिस एंड जीन डी म्योन। एंड यहीं से उठा करके चौसर ने लिखा है अपना रोमांस ऑफ द रोज। We do not know whether Chaucer has translated the poem, but it must have been quite early in the life. And in one of his later poems, जिसका नाम है Legend of Good Women, Chaucer refers to his authorship of his translation of the French poem. And the French poem is in 3 parts, partly written by Guillaume and partly by Myong. And the theme is courtly love, which is treated idealistically by the former poet and realistically and satiristically by the latter poet, that is Myon. And it was a very popular poem of the 13th century. The influence of the poem, however, on Chaucer's subsequent poetry was immense. Chaucer must have taken very great interest in the French original. Literally, hundreds of lines from the Roman appear in his own poetry, either in the close translation or in the paraphrase. Now there is a poem, आपने कभी सुना नहीं होगा शायद, उसका नाम है एन ए बी सी। एन ए बी सी ऐसे कर सकते हैं, एन ए बी सी। दिस वॉज अनदर पीस ऑफ ट्रांसलेशन from a very long French devotional poem composed in 1330 by a French monk poet, Guillaume de Digouille करके कहा था कोई। Chaucer translated only a small portion of the original poem by that person, and it being a prayer to the Blessed Virgin. It was Lydgate, John Lydgate, the early 15th century poet, who first of all ascribed the translation to Chaucer. The critical opinion has since then placed the poem in Chaucer's second period, and sometime before 1370. And this translation is interesting since Chaucer rejects in his translation the octosyllabic words of the French original and uses the 10-syllable line, an evidence of his growing spirit of maturity as a poet. So this is an ABC. Then there is another poem, Complaint unto Pity. इसका स्पेलिंग आप देख लीजिए। COM लिखिए, COM PLEYNT, unto complaint unto pity, PITE. This is a poem by Chaucer on unrequited love, a common practice among the medieval poets. And this was an early poem by Chaucer. It has been surmised that the period of composition might be between 1367 or 1370. And the theme of unfulfilled love, which the poem elaborates, might not have been personal, for such a theme was in Chaucer's time a part of the poetic convention only. The next is the Book of the Duchess, जो आपने शायद खुद भी पढ़ा हो. And this Book of the Duchess was an elegy composed on the death of Blanche. Who was Blanche? The Duchess of Lancaster and the first wife of John of Gaunt. और John of Gaunt कौन था? He was Chaucer's patron. She died late in 1369 and the poem was composed within a few months after her death. Chaucer borrowed the facts from a number of sources and the notable of which, कौन कौन से सोर्सेज मेन थे? ये क्वेश्चन आता है कि जो बुक ऑफ डचेस लिखा है चौसर ने, वो किन की हेल्प से लिखा होगा? तो उसमें जो नोटेबल सोर्सेज हैं वो हैं ओविड की मेटामॉर्फोसिस, ओविड्स मेटामॉर्फोसिस. The technique of the poem is modeled on the conventional courtly poet of France of the same period, and it proves the strong influence of French romantic poetry of Chaucer. And there are also references to this poem in the two other poems of Chaucer, that is the Legend of Good Women and the Man of Law's Tale in the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales जब आप पढ़ेंगे ना तो उसमें बहुत सारी टेल्स हैं, तो उसमें एक टेल का नाम है मैन ऑफ लॉस टेल. And this poem, the Book of the Duchess, is written in the free octosyllabic verse. Then he has written a poem, The Complaint of Mars. The Complaint ऐसे कर सकते हैं, of M-A-R-S. This was a poem, again allegorical, which he might have written somewhere around 1374. And this poem, the theme of this poem centers around some mythological story of a love between Mars. Mars क्या है? The god of war, and Venus, the goddess of love, which is actually a very highly conventional theme of that period. So the next poem is The Parliament of Fowls, very important poem. The Parliament of Fowls. Parliament of Fowls, students, it is a long poem in which the poet very subtly wrote on the theme of love through an imaginary account of the parliament of birds. Chaucer used once again the rhyme stanza and freely used his source materials consisting of diverse literary works of the past. It is a great poem. इसी को कहते हैं, एक बार आया था क्वेश्चन कि what is the name of that poem which is a beast fable? So the answer was The Parliament of Fowls. The next poem is Complaint to His Lady. Complaint to His Lady. ऐसे Complaint to His Lady. ये भी चौसर की अर्ली पीरियड की पोएम है, somewhere around 1374. And again the subject of this poem is the romantic unfulfilled love. And the most interesting feature of this poem is the presence of the tarza rima stanza. इसमें जो इस्तेमाल किया है वो है tarza rima stanza, and the typical Italian poetic stanza that has been popularized by Dante in Divina Commedia, वो इसने उठाया है. This was popular in Dante's Divine Comedy. इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? ये शो करता है कि जो इटालियन इन्फ्लुएंस है वो बहुत स्ट्रांग था चौसर के ऊपर when he composed this poem, and hence we can say that Chaucer composed it soon after his first visit to Italy, जब वो इटली गया था. Clear? Now I will give you a poem, Annelida. Annelida and Archite.